Welcome to episode 60 of the Hard Truth About B2B e-commerce. I'm your co-host, Isaiah Bollinger, and I'm here with Tim, day before Thanksgiving.
Yes, so hi everyone, Timothy Peterson. Welcome to episode 60 of the Hard Truth. We are very excited to have you here. Let me give a couple shout outs from our sponsors first, and then we can dive right in. Our first sponsor is Punchout2Go. They are a global B2B integration company specializing in connecting commerce business platforms with e-procurement and ERP applications. Punchout2Go's iPass technology seamlessly links business applications to automate the flow of purchasing data. With their solution, you can immediately reduce integration complexities for Punchout catalogs, electronic purchase orders, invoices, and other B2B sales order automation documents to accelerate your business results. Thank you to Punchout2Go. And our second sponsor is Balance. Balance is a B2B e-commerce payment solution that works well for you and for your buyers. Offers a seamless one-click checkout for almost any payment method, including ACH, wire, checks, cards, even terms. And it's used by leaders in B2B e-commerce, but it's as easy as buying a shirt through Amazon. Check them out at getbalance.com, book a session, and tell them what your needs are. They are the first dedicated payment platform for B2B e-commerce, 100% tailored to your needs. Thank you again to both of our sponsors. And Isaiah, we have a great episode day before Thanksgiving, as you said. I can't wait for the holiday tomorrow. Please introduce our guests.
Yeah. This will obviously be launched after the holiday, so people will be kind of over the hump by the time this is released. But yeah, very, very excited to introduce Reed McGinley-Stempel. I'm trying to do my best to say your last name. It's a tough one, but pretty exciting timing. I just was going to your website before the podcast, and on the top it says you guys just raised $90 million in a Series B. You guys are a pretty new company now, valued at $1 billion, which is pretty amazing. Tell us about how did you guys do that so fast? I mean, you said I think it's only been 18 months, so that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a whirlwind of 18 months, and it's been a little bit surreal to see all of this, occur so quickly since we were founded at the beginning of the pandemic. But I think, while we're early on in terms of time, 18 months and still a small team, roughly 30 people today, I think there were a lot of tailwinds that were in our advantage, where when you thought about the pandemic, where a lot of users went online and were creating more online accounts, a lot of different companies were thinking about how do we make it easier for users to create accounts and then log in. And so as you had that proliferation of user accounts, there's a lot more attention on what is the friction involved in someone signing up, logging in, checking out in a online experience. And so Stytch, which we provide tools for developers and companies to embed passwordless technology, I think it was just a really opportune time for us to start the company with those kind of macro tailwinds in the background.
So what does passwordless mean for most people? Like, I think a lot of people don't even really know what that is, right? So, everyone's used to logging in with a password, but like, how do you log in without a password?
Yeah, definitely. It's a great question, and one that we answer often in our early prospect calls. And so if you think about the way that you mostly log in today with a password, you're really just taking this memorized secret that you're keeping in your head or on a post-it note or in a password manager, and then you come back to a site and you have to reiterate it every time you want to get access to it.
Yeah.
Passwordless technology is thinking through what are the methods that we could securely and in a very easy user experience authenticate you without you having to remember or produce a memorized secret. And so there are a few different technologies that fall under that umbrella. There are things like I can verify your email address, so I can send you a magic link, is what we call it. It's just a magic high entropy token that's embedded into the call to action button that says like sign in. There are companies like Substack that use this. Instagram has started using this for their password reset flow. You've started to see it gain more adoption. So email is one method by which you can authenticate someone. So you backbone the account on the email. Another way is SMS passcode. So these are phone number verifications.
Yeah.
Often these are used in kind of two-factor methods, right? If you already have a username and password, and then you
That's
put
the most
2FA.
annoying thing, because sometimes we have like company accounts and we're like, what phone number do we put? Like, because it's a
Yeah.
text, and it's like, well, what if multiple people use the account? Like, it's just
Yeah, not easy.
Totally.
yeah, I hate I mean, I get why it exists, but it's always a pain. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm just kind of laughing about the problems we have.
Oh, no worries. And yeah, I think that's a great point, where one of the things that we talk about with customers is like, there are a lot of passwordless technologies. If you're a B2B, it's probably a very different option set than B2C, to that point there, where like personal phone number verification might not be the best way to let someone into
Terrible.
a B2B site.
Terrible.
And then the other options that I'd mention are, you have biometric technology. We now have biometrics built into virtually every handheld and desktop device. Definitely the last couple generations of desktop devices. So right now I'm sitting here on my Mac, which has Touch ID, which is the way that I log into the laptop. But there's now finally technology that lets you use the Touch ID to log into websites as well. So that's one of our more recent products that we released. And then the last one that I'll note, even though there's a few others, are OAuth connections. So if you've ever logged in with Google or logged in with Apple or logged in with Microsoft, effectively what that is it's backboning your account to another tech provider that you associate security with. And so all of these are just different options where you can authenticate someone without the password. The main thing that usually gets asked after that is like, how could it be more secure to get rid of the password, which is usually this very complicated thing that I have to remember and then reproduce. And if you think about it, probably every online account that you use today has the concept of passwordless authentication, even if they don't, speak about it in that way. And so anytime that you go through a password reset flow, really what that is a passwordless access to your account, because it's saying you've forgotten your password. Let's send you an email to verify that you still have ownership of this email. If you have ownership of this email, you can reset your password and then log in.
Yeah, so from a security standpoint, if someone hacked their email, they could probably access their account by doing the password reset, right?
Exactly, yeah. And so the way we think about it is, emails today are already the keys to the kingdom. And most users actually internalize that. More users in the US have 2FA on their email account than they do on their bank account, which makes sense given the fact that, as you said, if you get into someone's email account with a password reset flow, you can effectively get anywhere.
So I have just a quick question on the touch and versus, let's say, facial and eye scan. So I've done all three of those in tests for different things in recent years. Some of them were physical, some of them were non-physical, in person, I should say. Some of them were for websites. So how does that work for you? You said you can choose touch as an option. So could you explain the biometrics a little bit more for our listeners?
Definitely. The way that we support biometrics today, and we'll expand this product set, is through a protocol called WebAuthn, which WebAuthn was developed by some of the big tech companies in the last few years to make it possible for you to use two things as an authentication factor when you're logging into a web application, either on desktop or on mobile. So the first is what we were talking about, which is the built-in biometrics on the device. So how, when I go to customersite.com, can I use the Touch ID if I'm on a desktop experience with my Mac, or the Face ID if I'm on Safari or Chrome with mobile? And then the other factor, which is less popular with B2C applications, but pretty popular with B2B and workforce applications, is that this protocol also supports hardware keys. So like YubiKeys, if you've used that in the past, are supported as well by this protocol. That, of course, isn't biometrics, but it is another secure way to authenticate people. On the biometric side, really what you're doing is you're just backboning that authentication with the WebAuthn protocol to Apple's Face ID, Android's Face ID, or the Mac's Touch ID. And so it's leveraging what we already kind of use on a daily basis for logging into the device to also allow that session to extend to the website or mobile app that we're going to.
So a quick follow-up on that. Do you also do voice authentication? I do that with one of my financial institutions. So I'm literally repeating a verbal password, that they listen, and then it works, and that is the only way that I connect to that particular institution at this point.
Interesting. And do you use a password before you get to that 2FA step, or is that the only way to?
You use a code, so it's a PIN. Use a PIN, but actually you can avoid that. There's another process you can go through to get it authenticated once, and then you go into their physical banking locations as well. It's a test program. I'm reluctant to say it because I don't want people to record my voice and go do something with it. However, they're trying to do this in person and online and through app with just my voice recording a particular phrase, and then that is what I have to repeat each time. And they say, can you repeat this?
Interesting. The reason I asked is I'm also enrolled in one of my financial institutions, like voice recognition, MFA. We don't support it yet. I think at some point we will. I think to your point that you mentioned earlier, where you're hesitant to say where it is because you don't want people to record your voice, is actually, it's one of the reasons we haven't supported that technology for biometrics yet. Because when you think about the Touch ID and the Face ID, there's actually two things that are being verified when you use that. One, it's verifying it's the same device that you have the original biometric marker on. And then two, it's verifying that this is biometric proof, either via facial recognition or fingerprint. And voice recognition is a little bit different because today we don't have that welded to our iPhone or to our Mac. So you could go to a remote desktop or remote mobile and try to steal someone's account with their voice being recorded. And so that's one of the reasons we haven't yet supported it, is this attack vector, which is called a replay attack, is not really possible with Touch ID and Face ID, but it is with some of these things like voice MFA.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I would say about that I found interesting is that they are experimenting with it. So they want to have voice as primary, and they've been trying out whether you say a particular password or a PIN number, or it's ever changing and you have to get it sent to you via SMS or whatever. And it's kind of an interesting process because you clearly see they're trying to figure this out. And I volunteered to be part of that program to test it out.
That's great. And I do think it's interesting from like a layered approach. So if they're sending you a text message or an email where they're also verifying that channel that you own this inbox, and then you provide the voice recognition, I think that's great because that's really hard for an attacker to emulate both of those things.
Exactly. That's what I thought too. And so I'm glad we're having this conversation because I already feel better about it. I'm like, how does this work? Are people just going to pick up my voice and off they go?
You obviously know a lot about security because you're dealing with password or passwordless technology and account logins and access to things that, that's like can be worth a lot of money, bank accounts, whatever it may be. So I guess, can you explain to people, that are listening, why does this, what's the point of this passwordless technology? I mean, I think at a basic level, I think people kind of understand on like your iPhone, it's a little bit easier, just like recognize your face, it's a little bit faster, but in general, like for B2B e-commerce and just e-commerce in general, like where do you see this going where it's actually going to make things a lot better for people?
Yeah, so there's always that question of, someone hears about passwordless, and I'd say most people we talk to have that visceral reaction of, yeah, I hate passwords. So this sounds great, but like, why would a business pay you for this? And it's actually like two main categories of improvement that you get with passwordless technology, which is why it makes sense for businesses to offer this to end users. The first is that you can vastly increase conversion at sign up and login for your website. Which can actually reduce things like acquisition cost for customers, can also increase the lifetime value of the user if they don't drop out in the future when they forget their password and then never come back to your site. So that's one big category, is how do you increase conversion in order to affect your core business metrics? For example, we just had a customer that migrated from a large incumbent password as a service authentication vendor to us, and they saw a 62% increase in conversion for signups. And so that's great because that, effectively halves their acquisition cost for users and allows them to have much better margins. The other piece of this, though, is increasing security, both for the company itself and for their end users. So one of the things I worked on before working at Stytch is that I worked at a company called Plaid, which is the primary way that users connect their bank accounts to financial technology applications like Venmo, Robinhood, Coinbase, etc.
Yeah,
And
the kind of like the ACH authentication type thing where it's like connect your bank account, and now I've sent
exactly.
money to Robinhood or Venmo and hope that it works. And I always get worried with Robinhood. I'm like, am I just one day they're just gonna like, so what if someone just gets into my account? It seems too easy.
Exactly. And that was really an eye-opening experience for me to see, working in the financial technology space where there's so much fraud and attack vectors that are focused on how do I steal someone's bank account. There were a lot of things I had not thought about as an end user until joining that space. And one of the really the largest security threat in fintech is that users have weak or stolen passwords that lead to their accounts being compromised. And if you think about it, one of the other problems with us using a memorized secret, like a password for your account, is that most users will sign up for an account and it will say, here are 5 conditions you have to meet. It has to have, an exclamation mark. It has to have a capital letter. It has to have a phone number, or it
So
has to have a
annoying.
number.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so users, generally, if you're not thinking about the risk that this introduces, it's very common for a user to say, maybe I'll choose 1 or 2 passwords that I've memorized. Maybe it has like your pet's name and a year and an exclamation point or something like that. And I'll just reuse it across many different sites because I know it always works. And then what you find is when you do a password check on one of those users, and you can use things like Apple has a password check, health check that you can do with them. Google Chrome has one. Often you'll find people have up to 100 reused passwords across accounts. And so the big risk that gets introduced there for both the companies and for end users is that you're trusting every single one of those companies, whether it's Chase, which has a great security framework, or whether it's, a mental health startup, or whether it's an e-commerce site, you're trusting all of them to safeguard this memorized secret that can access 99 of your other accounts. And so often what we would see in the fintech space is that the minute there was a big breach at like Target or LinkedIn or Yahoo, and you get millions of usernames, emails, and passwords that are leaked, yeah, immediately the attackers would say, oh, I wonder what percentage of these users reuse the exact same username password at Chase or Wells Fargo. And so then effectively you're trusting that e-commerce site the same way that you trust Chase. And you're exposing the risk of that small e-commerce site getting breached to the same risk as, now your Chase account is at threat. And so that's one of the big security issues, is that even if you do everything right as a company, if your users are reusing passwords, you could be potentially liable for fraud loss if there is monetary movement on your platform because someone steals their account. Or if you're an end user, obviously that's a really bad experience if you find out you've been hacked, and so therefore someone's able to log into your Robinhood account and withdraw money.
So one of the clients that I had, I've worked with a number of people in cybersecurity over the years, was Norton Symantec, when they were one big company for consumer and B2B. And they, we were working on content for them. And so we're pretty deep in like survey data and focus group data. And what was fascinating, to your point, is that people group their passwords. So they'd memorize 2 or 3, but they would group 1 for all financial, and they'd group 1 for all like shopping, and they'd group 1 for whatever. And so you're right. If you get 1 per category, then you have all. And people. I was really shocked to discover that a lot of people, without thinking about it, have 250 accounts with passwords, or 300 accounts with passwords, because they've forgotten, or they don't use, and they're going in one here and there and everywhere. It's not like it's just Amazon or just Google. It's like 300 accounts. So it's astounding. What you're talking about is so real for so many consumers and businesses.
Well, if you don't do that, I just want to add to that. It's hard because a lot of these things require mobile, and then those password managers aren't very good at mobile. I don't know if you've ever used one of these on a mobile. It barely works. So
I agree.
If you're trying to kind of log in on things on mobile, you kind of need to have your passwords memorized, and once you're logged in, but sometimes things get reset. it's really hard to operate without with like 250 different passwords. Like you can use LastPass or whatever, but like I've tried it, and there are many times where it's become like a huge problem on mobile for me. I've had to like go to my desktop and like go to LastPass and then like type it into my computer because it's like a complicated path, and it's a really bad experience.
I also have competing password managers in my life. I have like 1Password, which I pay for, and then Google Chrome will do some work on desktop. And then I have an iOS phone. So Apple tries to store things on their keychain, and then I end up with, 3 different passwords because I've had to reset it at some point when I'm in a different context. And so, yeah, it's really interesting to see that fragmentation in the space.
Yeah, and then you reset it, and then you forget what the new one is. So now all of a sudden you like can't get into something if you ever need to. So you just get into this like reset loop of like constantly resetting your passwords.
Yeah, and what's fascinating too is that we're more normal than a lot of people would guess. I mean, the way I'm going to put this out there is kind of convoluted, but I'm in a home office, right? And I share the home office, and so during COVID, there was work happening here, and it was my husband or myself back and forth, and we're in so many different like Gmail accounts, so many different Google accounts that we're signing in and out all the time, and it's like, well, was that password inadvertently saved to the other one? It's like, where is it? So you also have that situation, which is just really confusing and really frustrating. It's like, why don't I have that password saved? Oh, it's in the other Chrome. It's like, what's happening now? It's crazy.
And one of the interesting things that we've seen is, to both of your points about, yes, it's common for a user to try to make that simpler for themselves by choosing a group of passwords that they iteratively reuse, is that there's actually a really complicated supply chain on the fraud side of how the black market works once there's a breach. So there's a part of the black market that is responsible for breaching LinkedIn or Target or Yahoo. They then sell those credentials to another party that is responsible for validating them. And so what they do is that they go build bots that are always running on the internet, trying to put those credentials into chase.com, into bankofamerica.com, trying to get hits on your passwords that have been leaked. And then those get passed off for a dollars per password to someone that's willing to take on the risk of exploitation and actually draining bank accounts. And so it's really wild when you think about how much criminal enterprise has actually been created and pretty structured based off the fact that passwords are just a really suboptimal way for us to authenticate. And it's even gotten to the point that the way most security researchers will talk to us about passwords is that you should just consider them pre-breached if you're building an application. So you should, if you are onboarding users, you should assume that they are reusing that password that has already been breached in another breach like LinkedIn's or Target's. And so that's actually the reason we've ended up with username, password, and then all these 2FA options like SMS, Google Authenticator, and more secure settings, biometrics sometimes. And so one of the things we think about with passwordless is if we don't trust the password anymore, why are we even dealing with it? Let's move on to the lower friction methods and figure out what the best fit is for a particular vertical and allow them to just completely shelve the password creation and remembrance step entirely.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think you've sold us. I feel like we're sold. So
where do I sign up?
Yeah, what do you do? Like, okay, you're like, all right, this makes a lot of sense. Like, obviously, we should modernize, go to passwordless. I think it's one thing. These modern tech companies, they have a lot of engineers, they can do it. But let's use the example of our clients at the Trellis side or the agency side. Like, they're just Shopify client, Magento client. They can really just only afford Trellis, which is, just kind of like part-time resources. Ultimately, generally, they're not, necessarily hiring a full team of ours full time. So it's like they have limited resources, right? They don't have, 10 engineers on staff. Like, are you guys going to eventually create like an app for some of these ecosystems to make it easier, or how do they get started with you guys?
Yeah, so the actually primary reason that we started Stytch was to try to solve for that problem you're talking about there, which is people want a more secure and better user experience for sign up and login, but they probably can't justify spending 2 quarters and a team of engineers to try to build this out themselves. We had actually tried to build some of this stuff out at Plaid, and we were shocked there was not a vendor on the market that made this easy. There's really big authentication companies like Okta and Auth0, but they're definitely of that password-based kind of era. And so what we've done is the first thing that we asked ourselves when we were starting Stytch was, why is there not a Stripe for authentication, or in particular passwordless authentication? So why isn't there something that you can get set up with in 15 to 30 minutes with one developer that would allow them to have a really optimal sign up and login experience? And so that's what we created with Stytch, was making it really easy for anyone to integrate passwordless authentication. I think the next step, to your point though, is could you even make it so that a developer's time is not even needed in some of these integrations? And that's where, it's still on the future roadmap. It's not something we built yet, but do you build a plugin with things like Webflow or the other no-code, low-code websites? We actually just acquired a passwordless company called Cotter, which had been backed by Y Combinator, and they focus specifically on this piece, which was passwordless authentication for no-code and low-code sites. And so that is on our future roadmap. Though today we've definitely focused on, if you have a developer at least that you can spare for an hour, a couple hours, you can get up and running with Stytch fairly easily and have a passwordless flow.
Yeah. And what would that look like? Let's say a couple hours implementing your software. Like, how does that work?
Yes.
Without trying to get too technical, maybe what's the simplest way to explain that?
There's really two fundamental ways to integrate the software. Both are easy. One's very, very easy, and the other one's just very easy, I would say. So the two ways to think about it are, one, you can actually use our front end if you want us to own the UI. It's customizable, so you can adapt it to your brand, but you can actually use our front end components so that you don't need to have a developer that knows that much about how to build a sign up or login form on your website or app. And so
not be embedded into an existing website, or does that have to be like an separate experience, or can it like kind of feel like it's all the same domain?
Yeah, it can be embedded into the existing website. That was one of the problems we also had with the incumbents, is that they're very focused on redirecting you to another domain.
I hate that.
Yeah. And actually, the reason they do that is because they're dealing with passwords. They want to make sure their end customer never touches the password. So they don't want it to be embedded on somebody's website, because that is a memorized secret that might be able to be used across 100 different sites. So phishing risks become higher. But because we're not dealing with passwords, it's one of the reasons we can be a lot more flexible about where you embed it. And so that's the first option, is that you can embed our front end components adaptably into whatever site you have. That's the very, very easy option I was talking about. It's pretty much like you copy a few lines of code, you put it in there, you have to handle a little bit of logic on the back end for that user, but it's very simple. The other option, which is a lot of our customers that are really design and UX centric, that are very opinionated about how their sign up and login form should look, to a degree where our customization might not meet entirely what they'd want to do, they can use our direct API integration, which just means that there's no front end components from Stytch, but you're using our passwordless authentication modules effectively. So what you're doing is whenever you want to initiate an authentication method, like an email magic link, a biometric authentication, sign in with Google, you effectively make an API call to Stytch, and then we are able to facilitate that for the user, but they own the UI UX in that example.
Yeah. So that especially works well for kind of the headless API technology. If someone were to use the widget module version, let's call it, could they eventually switch to the other version if you wanted to? So there's no reason to like, hey, get started quickly, and then you can always upgrade kind of when you have more time. Right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And a fair number use it as a hybrid approach, where they'll use the front end for some components they don't want to build, but then maybe they want to customize certain things, and we'll use the direct API for another feature.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So how do you figure out how much you charge a customer based on very, very, or very easy? How do you figure that out?
So we actually charge the same for both of those cases, because we don't really want to discriminate against whether you want to use our UI or whether you don't. We understand that's kind of like a company decision based on what their values are around UX and UI. So the pricing generally for Stytch is that we have two options. We have a pay-as-you-go, where there's no minimum commitment, and it's just based on usage. And that's 10 cents per monthly active user. So that means a user was actively signed up or logged in that month. So obviously that's like the highest our unit rate goes. After that, we do discounted pricing for any monthly minimum commitments somebody is willing to make. So if you're willing to make a 500, 1,000, whatever that monthly minimum commitment is based on your volume, we can give you some nice discounts on unit rates. And our monthly active user encapsulates every single product. So you can use biometrics, you can use email magic links, you can use SMS. If you really only want to use one of those products, that's also another conversation we can have with companies about whether there should be different pricing. But generally, we try to keep it pretty simple that you can choose pay as you go or negotiate for bigger discounts.
Volume, generally volume based. If you have a bajillion users, a million users, it's going to be a lot different than if you have,
Yeah, so if you get like Meta, Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram, you'll have quite a lot coming in monthly, no matter what the discount rate. Okay, I get that. That's good. So just another kind of question. Again, thinking about how our listeners could find out about you and get involved. Let's say that are you looking for partners, right? Are you looking for partners in financial services so that, let's say, all of Bank of America's sign-ins switch over to using what you have? Or like, how does that work with you? Or do you have like an internal sales team working on these things? Or just explain a little bit of that process too.
Yeah, so we have 3 primary channels for go-to-market today. The first is kind of self-serve, where a developer says, oh, I want this, and it's really easy for me to sign up, and I can be done in 30 minutes. We see a lot of startups will self-serve into the product. I've even been surprised. We've seen some Fortune 100 financial institutions self-serve into the product because I guess they had to develop. Yeah.
That's great.
And it initiates a longer conversation with them, but they've integrated before we actually talk with them because I think they were based in Europe and they actually integrated before we woke up one morning, which was great to see.
And they're testing it out, right? They're like, let's see if this works. And
exactly. Yeah. So we have that. That's one channel is like self-serve. We'll always have that so that anyone that wants to sign up and not talk to a salesperson can do that. We also have a sales team that is focused on kind of more consultative integration. So you can come to our website and choose talk to an auth expert, or you can go to the pricing page and contact us for discounts. In either of those scenarios, our salesperson will work a little bit more hands-on with them to figure out how do you want to architect this solution? What are the authentication methods that make the most sense for your vertical? How could we most increase conversion for your use case or security, depending on why you're coming to Stytch? And then the third one is actually on that partnership side, where we do have a pretty burgeoning partnerships channel. A lot of it started early on kind of the tech startup incubators like Y Combinator, Techstars, 500 Startups. Those were partnerships we established early on. Now we are actually starting to work with some more of like the financial institution incubators that they have, some of the e-commerce, SMS and email marketing, kind of aggregating companies that want to allow low friction interaction with applications. And so we're always open if companies want to talk to us about partnerships to figure out whether something makes sense there.
Well, I'll give you one thing that I was thinking about prior to having this this wonderful interview with you, is that so for example, Clear, Clear, where you get the biometric scans, either you get the touch pads at the airport or the eye scans or what have you. I find that really great. Like when I get back to traveling, I'm very happy to be a member of Clear. However, you have to do password and all of that stuff to sign into their site to make sure you're renewing and updating whatever. And it always feels completely dorky to me that they're so sophisticated, physically, and that they're not, in the other end. And they're not the only company that's like that. They have like one aspect of what they do that's pretty great and pretty advanced, and other aspects, well, it's like, why am I doing this? Anyway, I just want to bring up folks like that, if they're listening, to contact you guys and join the fun.
So yeah, I just want to jump in, change gears a little bit, because I don't know how many people actually finish the podcast, right? That'd be a good metric for us to figure out, like, what's the drop-off rate, like when they get
everybody does. Everybody
gets to halfway through, but we're pretty deep into it, and I want to just talk briefly and make sure we touch on how could a especially a B2B company, which a lot of them are legacy companies, right? They're companies that basically have been around for, 10, 20, generally more like 40, 50 years, sometimes even 100 years, or like multi-generational companies usually. And a lot of their data is stuck in the ERP system. And that's why B2B e-commerce is so hard for them, frankly, is generally these companies have all this legacy data and systems and processes. And then it's really hard to be like, oh, we're just gonna like put that all online. And now you can just like log in and buy everything. Pricing super complex. There's just a lot of complexities to like bringing that online, which is what the podcast is kind of about, although some of these are newer companies. And I would argue that technically you're a B2B e-commerce company, right? Because you have self-serve and people can go on and just buy your product. So there are new SaaS, B2B e-commerce companies, but you guys are usually kind of pretty far ahead. So for the companies that are making the switch or getting better at it, like how could they use they could take their customer data and give them a passwordless login. I think we talked about that briefly offline for the podcast. Like, can you explain what you would recommend, or just some examples of what they could do?
While I'm obviously overall a huge, nerd for passwordless authentication, I actually think it makes particular sense in this use case that you're talking about, where you might have a system with all this customer data, and historically, maybe you never had an online portal. So you don't even have the sense of a user, like you don't have the sense of an online user account. So you probably don't have a password tied to that user's information that you might want to unlock for them if they are placing an updated order, or if they're submitting a support ticket, whatever the online interaction is you're trying to drive with them. And so I think one of the big points of friction, if you're trying to go from legacy offline to online, is that you're going to have to send out a blast email campaign to every user asking them to create and confirm a password. You're going to have to walk them through that user account creation process. Probably a lot of them are not going to take you up on that option. They'll probably just ignore it. So maybe you get 30, maybe you get 50, maybe you get 70% penetration. I'm not sure. But either way, it's probably a whole ordeal and probably not
100%,
the intended
right?
outcome.
Probably not 100%. And to that point, just want to add a quick note. Some of these companies might have a platform, but maybe it's only 5% adoption. Like literally, that's a lot of these companies, right? 5% of their customers use the online platform. When you switch platforms, which is generally the case of what you have to do because the platform's old and you got to go to like a new platform, like a BigCommerce, Magento, Shopify, kind of the common platforms, right? You have to force people to reset their password. You can't migrate their passwords. So even if they upgrade their platform and they have like 20% adoption or whatever, they still have to force everyone to reset their password in that scenario.
That's interesting. I was actually curious about whether the BigCommerce platforms allowed for migrations, but that's really helpful context.
There might be some crazy way to do it, but you're talking about legacy platforms or another platform. So a lot of times the other platform that they're coming from maybe doesn't have a good way to do it. And it's generally like not something that is done. So generally you have to kind of force everyone to reset their password.
Interesting. And just to kind of flesh out the piece around where I think passwordless could completely change a lot of these experiences when you're going from offline to online. So if you take that experience where you're not going to get 100% penetration, asking a user to either migrate their password or to create a new account because they've never had an online account with you, one of the wonderful things about passwordless authentication is that you actually have everything you need to passwordlessly authenticate them without requiring them to create a new account, because you probably have email addresses. My guess is your primary identifier.
Yes.
And then
phone numbers. Yeah, they have a lot of information. I mean, these are customers buying from them, right? They have their billing info, ship to. I mean, a lot of these customers are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars all offline.
And the way this has actually worked with customers that have integrated us in the past, that they have an installed base of users and they're migrating away from passwords, is that really there's two simple steps with Stytch. One is that you say, here's my user database. I just want to create Stytch users for them. So here's 100,000 email addresses. I want to make sure if those 100,000 email addresses or phone numbers, however you want this user to log in, whether it's by phone number or email, I want to make sure if they come to my website and they choose either login with email or login with Google, Microsoft, or login with phone number, that they are not blocked, that they get the actual authentication. So it may not feel like they created an account because they're just let in the door once they put in the right information. And obviously they have to authenticate themselves with that information through an email magic link or through an SMS passcode, depending on how you want to authenticate them. But you never need to make them do any extra work. This is also great for if a user doesn't remember if they ever went through the account creation process, is that, yeah, it will just be available to them next time they're having an email exchange with you and you say, you should really submit the support ticket here, or you can place that inventory order here, and you point them to the site. They'll never need to worry about, do I have an account? Because they have the identification method that is going to actually be used for them to log in without a password.
Wow. So one thing related to this, I talked with a cybersecurity firm a while ago, startup. They're still pretty early stage. And one of the things that they were struggling with, they were trying to figure out if you could move away from using emails or phones at all as a point of contact, and figure out how to have something that's secure. And they kept falling back. It's like, well, there's the social security number. It's like, well, you can't use that. So I'm not sure where they ended up on this, and I have to go back to these folks and say like where they are. But that was a big part of their conversation early on in the stage that I was involved. And it's like, well, I don't know. I mean, what do you have if I refuse to have a mobile phone and I run away from email? Can I participate in this world, and how would people know it's me?
There's a way to do it. It definitely becomes more complex without email or without a contact method, though there actually is a way with the Touch ID and Face ID method that we were talking about earlier. That doesn't need to be necessarily, if you're using WebAuthn as a protocol, it doesn't require it's tied to a contact method like email or phone number. You could have a username, which could be an anonymous account that you want to keep private, could be your real name if you'd like that, but don't want to use email. And then what happens whenever you put in that username on a website and you say, I want to use WebAuthn, is it can initiate the Touch ID verification of, is this the same user that registered that username? You get into some questions where I wouldn't advise that for every single application, because one of the things that it does is it does what we call enumerating accounts. So if I put in a username and then I get a Touch ID that pops up, I know that username exists on the platform, which if it's an anonymous account, probably not leaking any private data there.
Sure.
If you were to use like real email addresses, and this is a health tech startup or a fintech where you're leaking information about they bank here or they might be using this health tech site, that's where enumerating accounts, which indicates to a potential attacker that there is an account here, is where you might get into some areas where you want to be a little bit more careful about it. And that's actually one of the reasons when you do a reset password that you see that language that's, if you have an account here, we will send you an email, is that they're trying to make sure that people that are trying to figure out if a user has an account there is not abusing that system, and that only a real user would benefit from a password reset.
No, very helpful. Thank you. Very interesting.
So it sounds like there's a lot of different use cases for you guys. Like one is just updating the way that people log in and manage their accounts and move to this new passwordless kind of world. But there's also the concept of like getting legacy maybe customers that are in Salesforce or HubSpot, and basically like creating accounts for them without them having to create a password. Like there's this world where we could say like, hey, I'm going to take my 20,000 contacts in HubSpot and create an account for them just with your software, right? And not everyone might accept it, but I could like send that out to all of them, right?
Exactly. And when you send that notification to everyone, hey, you all have an account now, or even if you're sending other notifications like a newsletter update and something with a call to action to try to drive the user to the site, one of the products that we built a few months ago is what we call embedded authentication. So what are ways that you can embed authentication to other customer communications? So effectively authentication feels invisible. So historically today, for you to sign up or log into a site, you've also had to go to a website and then go through an onboarding form.
Yes.
What embedded authentication does is it actually uses the same magic link technology where it's a high entropy token that you generate, but instead of putting it in a, click on this link to sign up or to log in, experience, you can embed it into a product update email. You can embed it into a cart abandonment email if you're an e-commerce site. And when someone clicks on that, you can know that it was actually clicked by Isaiah@gmail.com or from the phone number that you sent it to. Or we have some customers using this for WhatsApp too, if they're in international markets. And so it becomes a really seamless way to both authenticate where a user's coming from and make sure that you're giving them a personalized experience. But to them, it feels just natural, like clicking on an offer. And so one of the e-commerce companies we're actually talking to that uses this for promotional emails saw an increase in their promotional email conversion to purchase from 1% to 3%. So roughly 300% increase, just because the user who is high intent when they click on that, 10% off or $10 off deal, they're high intent, but when they hit a logged out experience that says you have to go through a password reset in order to get back in here, they were losing, 2/3 of the potential people that wanted to actually take them up on the offer.
So does the person, when they click on let's say your version of the email, do they just kind of like are logged in and authenticated right in the email itself? They don't have to like go to the website, or once they go to the website from that click, they're already logged in essentially? Like it's all kind of embedded in the email. And
so yeah, today the way it works is that when they click on it, it does take them to the website, but then it's a logged in experience on the website. And it can also even take them to like the checkout page or whatever the customized page was that you wanted to take them to. There are some interesting technologies where you could get to a world where you don't actually have to leave your email client. Google AMP is one of these, where I don't know if you've ever been editing a Google Doc in Gmail, where now it allows you to reply or resolve from within Gmail. And it's a really interesting technology that's not super widespread in terms of its use cases yet, but has some, credible ways you could use that in the future for authentication, so that I could finish a purchase from Gmail without actually going to a site. Today, that's still pretty nascent, but in the future, I think that'll be more common.
But to your point originally, though, they're already logged in once they use your technology in the email. So basically, in the future, you guys will probably have some sort of like integration or app with like the Klaviyo's of the world, I'm assuming, because those are the guys sending, MailChimp. These are the people sending out most of these emails, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I really like that. I'm thinking about this from either a B2B or B2C, perspective, where you're coming into the email box. You're right. It could be Klaviyo or whoever it is, MailChimp, and I'm clicking and done, essentially, as opposed to clicking and then going through this and then going through that. I really like that idea. If I make a decision and I'm ready, why should I have to go through 2 or 3 more hurdles? I like that. I think it's really great. Very smooth.
So can you give us any more examples of, e-commerce specifically? I know like maybe you can't tell everything.
Tell us everything
about who your customer is, and I don't want you guys to get in trouble for sharing too much, but you gave the example of the 1 to 3% lift on email signups or conversion there, which is huge, right? A lot of people don't realize that, like, if you increase your conversions in e-commerce from 2 to 3%, like, checkout like overall conversions, that's like 50% lift in sales, right? So these little, I think people kind of underestimate these little improvements. If each one does 10%, 10%, like all of a sudden you could double your sales, right? So are there any kind of exciting examples in e-commerce that you guys are seeing so far? I'm sure more will come, but.
Yeah, so there's probably 2 things I would call out. One is the example where someone went from the password to passwordless, the 62% conversion increase. That's a pretty common figure that we see around like north of 50%. Wow. That you're increasing your conversion. That's the published case study. You can look it up. It's Lighthouse. So they have a lot of quotes in the study that went live a couple weeks ago. That's one thing that generally you're going to see a pretty marked conversion increase just if you drop the password entirely. But for e-commerce in particular, the other thing that we've noticed some customers doing that I think might be interesting for certain people listening to this is that we've started seeing customers actually use the passwordless technology to create user accounts at checkout. So if you are checking out of something and you're already someone buying a product, and normally you're going through guest checkout, what they do is they say,
I'm like, I don't want to create a password, and like I'm not going to come back, or I don't think I'm going to come back. so I just don't bother.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of that too. And just because, yeah, I don't want to go through, especially on mobile, if I have to,
Oh,
spend
man.
30 seconds typing this out, it's really frustrating. And so that's where they've started using our direct API integration. And this is a reason the flexibility is great. Is we never foresaw us being used in the payment checkout flow maybe when we first started, but now they'll say, okay, I actually am going to create an account either based on your email or your phone number, or maybe I'll actually enroll you in the biometric so that next time you come back, I can have stored payment information for one-click checkout. I can also enroll you in loyalty points and promotional marketing. In promotional marketing, I can embed those magic links so that you are never getting a logged out experience with my site. So everything feels frictionless when I come back and want to reorder something. You could also, if it is the type of recurring purchase, one of your emails that you send could be a month later, do you want to order this again? And that could be a one-click, you send it back to them. And so those are some of the really interesting e-commerce use cases where one of the reasons we wanted to make our platform for integrating the product really flexible is we knew there were going to be customers that knew their end users better than we ever could. And so they were going to dream up these scenarios where they could improve user experience that we otherwise wouldn't have anticipated. And so it's one of the reasons we've avoided that integration method that you talked about, like a redirected domain and widget, where you're getting taken to another site, is that you're then being very prescriptive about how somebody uses your product. And it's been really cool for us to see the emergent use cases we didn't anticipate.
Yeah, it sounds like there's this whole world of opportunity where like it's not just about making sign up or log in better. It's like making the experience of them going from email or even social media. I could see some sort of like advertisement where somehow we're seeing some of that. We have a partner that they're embedding their 3D augmented, AR models, and you can like actually like embed those into emails or potentially advertising. And now it's like a more robust experience. So something like that where it's like, I could get the Instagram ad and all of a sudden like I've like bought, I'm like ready to check out and I'm logged in or like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, we've everybody in e-commerce talks about, friction and how to become frictionless. And this is really a great way to get closer to that. Like I really see skipping over so many of the hurdles that have just been, in the way, things that have just caused grief for, people in e-commerce forever. And this is an excellent way to kind of reconceptualize and figure out how to get beyond all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to hear your thoughts on, I think I just saw somewhere on LinkedIn, Tim, maybe you saw it too, because I know you're on there a lot as well. Someone was saying that, like, was it Walgreens or someone was finally using the Amazon Go technology, the like cameraless kind of.
I believe it's Walgreens, but there are actually a few hundred companies that are in early stages of testing that out because it's licensed now. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. So
this kind of vision that I see in terms of Tim helped us, we dropped the E at Trellis where like we make commerce simple, right? Because to us, it's just like, how do we make it easier to buy? I don't care how we're buying, but like the whole old ways of buying, just it's frustrating, right? Waiting in line or calling up or, whatever it may be. I had to call Verizon because I literally couldn't get into my account. Like it was so they have a business account and then a personal account, and I have both because we have Trellis, and then within Trellis we have multiple different uses for the business account, and they're not linked together. Like I couldn't figure out how to do it on their website. Like there's no easy way to figure it out. Like because there's so many things going on. I kept getting failure to log in. Like it would just like time out on their web. Like it was crazy. Like I'm like, these guys should hire us. Like this is how bad it is. I mean, maybe I'll get lucky and Verizon will call us, but I don't think we're gonna get
Verizon if you're listening
anytime soon. We're usually more working with mid-market customers, but long story short, our vision is to make things more simple, and I think Amazon Go technology is part of that. Kind of the clear model, right, where you can like, do you see a world in which like I can go in, they just like know who I am somehow from my face, but that same thing is also on the website. That same like Stytch could be kind of part of this like offline online world.
It,
or in person. Sorry, I shouldn't say offline. I should say in-person experience and online experience, right? Or desktop experience, right? Because you're going with that, like that whole world.
yeah,
Where do you see that going? Like, how do you see that evolving?
it's funny you mentioned Clear because that was the first thing that came to mind as you were talking about that. Is that's one of the things I'm really excited about with Clear. Is I'm curious. I probably have to do a little bit more research on how they've developed this thesis over the last couple of years, but I know they used to have pretty big ambitions about taking Clear from just the airport to checking out at a restaurant or you're at a stadium and it's the Face ID allows you to have your payment method and your identity verification that you're 21 plus and you can buy this beer. And so I think, it's a great call out on the Amazon Go piece, and I'll have to look a little bit more into what this new pilot program is doing there. But that is the vision as well for Stytch, where even though today a lot of what we do is eliminating friction on the internet, to your point, based on how the internet has evolved, there's both in-person experiences with the internet effectively in these Amazon Go stores, and there's these, purely online in front of a laptop or a mobile phone experiences. And there is a way that you can get there. I think the question is probably what is the appropriate level of friction for somebody to, be able to walk into a store and have that type of Amazon Go experience everywhere. I think it'd actually be pretty simple for us to make that just a Face ID experience, which would be great. I think one of the questions with Amazon Go, is my understanding, is maybe even never take your phone out. I'm not entirely sure how they're.
Yeah, I think it's all actually I'm actually not sure, but I know that at least it's all RFID tagged. Like the inventory, that the crazy part about it is like they know what you've taken. That's the
Yep.
I
right.
mean, so I've used Amazon Go, and I've used it at a prototype store and the one that they have across from Macy's Herald Square in New York City. There's a big Amazon store there and a couple others, and they've changed the way that you do it and upgraded it since. But the first time I used it, I opened the app in my phone, and that's how they recognized me when I came in, and then put my phone in my pocket and never touched it again, and left with my goods. So after that, I'm not sure if there's any other required scanning or anything else that happens, but that was the first experience that I had with it.
Interesting. Yeah, because I think that it's very straightforward in my mind how you'd enable that experience where one Face ID at checkout or when you enter a store can kind of allow you to be authenticated within that realm. And then to your point, like the RFID technology, that's not something Stytch is ever really going to build, but we can plug into all of those systems so that if you know that your shopping cart is $140 and you use Stytch to do the Face ID, that unlocks both the user account, but also the payment method that's tied to that. That is something I could see evolving in the future. And so, yeah, I'll have to pay a little bit more attention to how Amazon Go is rolling out, but I think it's a pretty promising way to authenticate in the real world in the future.
And just one footnote on Clear. I had spoken to them years ago at this point, but a couple of the other things they were talking about, concerts, as you said, and like the age verification for bars, things like that, which are great. I don't have my ID, let me eye scan, I'm a member of Clear, and then go right into the bar. But they were also talking, believe it or not, even about election related stuff, like, verify through my eye scans that it's my voter ID. They were talking about that. They were talking about police enforcement kind of stuff. So I don't have my driver's license, but I'm a member of Clear, and the police would just eye scan you and then connect. And so they had all kinds of ideas like that, let's say a few years back. I'm not sure which of those paths are going down, but it's all pretty good questions. Like, somebody's got to work on a lot of this stuff.
We're getting pretty close to Minority Report, guys. I don't know if you remember that. Do you remember that movie? It's like old. It's like 20 years old, and it's like everything was like eye scanned, and then it's like becomes this crazy thing where like, I don't know what, like if someone stole your identity somehow, and like
I'm waiting for the Jetsons though. I want a flying car. That's all I want. I just want my flying car.
So it's just funny how this stuff is coming to like a reality in kind of a simpler way. It's not quite there yet at the Minority Report example, but yeah, it sounds like you kind of see this same kind of thing, this frictionless, login, but it's basically like in the store experience, right? We just like walk in and they authenticate who you are. And then I can see it all being tied back to the website and the loyalty. That's kind of the big vision I have, is like, right now I feel like it's very disjointed when you have your kind of loyalty online or your experience online, and then you get recommendations from your website, but you don't really get recommendations because I went to, the store and bought something, right? Because there's really no way to do that right now, or there probably is, but no one's really doing that, right?
Definitely.
So Reed, I think we're getting close to wrapping up. Is there something else that you would like to put out there that we didn't bring up, or any other hot topic, like should I invest $90 million more in business? Or,
we'll double your investment. It sounds.
Well, I appreciate that. We're excited for Trellis to lead the next round in Stytch. I think we covered a lot of the really interesting topics around this area. I think we could talk for hours more, because I think a lot of these what if questions are what's really interesting to us in 2022, where if we think about ourselves as a platform for frictionless authentication and identity, there's a lot of interesting use cases, whether that's partnering with Clear in the future so that you can sign in with Clear to your bank account, or sign up for a bank account with Clear. And so those are all the things that I think you could talk about the what ifs for hours, but I think we've really touched on the major pieces around what passwordless technology is unlocking, but also a lot of the really emergent use cases where we've seen a lot of them, and I'm sure we're going to continue to be surprised on how people use our product over the next few years.
Can I ask you one more question before we go? I just want to. So I assume you guys what's the plan now? Like you only got 30 people. I assume you guys is it hiring a lot of people, building a lot of crazy stuff? Like what you guys probably have some pretty big plans, I'm assuming.
All of the above. Yeah, we actually just did headcount planning, which was based off of the products that we want to ship next year. And there's some really interesting products, particularly in the biometric space, where we're going deeper, as well as some more like solutions-based products. So now that we have a lot of requests from e-commerce sites, you can even deepen the value if you have some more e-commerce focused solutions for that vertical, as well as we get different requests from SaaS companies and different requests from fintech, et cetera. And so a lot of our product will continue to be kind of like deepened over the next year. And so the headcount we're looking at is getting closer to 150 people by end of next year, which is pretty rapid growth. We're excited for the challenge, but overall, I think most excited for some of the new authentication technologies that we're bringing to market in the next few quarters, and how that will allow users to start forgetting that they ever need to have a password. And so I'm very excited for that prospect.
Sounds good to me. I love that day to come where I can stop remembering all my random variations of passwords.
I love it. I really am so excited about this. And the little bit I knew about you before we had this podcast, I was excited, and now I'm even more excited. So I can't wait to talk about you guys to everybody else. This is great.
Yeah.
That's great to hear. Well, thank you both for having me on. I really appreciated it.
Yeah, congrats, and have a good Thanksgiving. I'm sure you'll have a lot to talk about with the family.
Yes.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Have a great one.
All right, you too. Thank you.